I was noticing that big companies were forcing innovation to entrepreneurs. There was an increasing startup capital efficiency, which has continued, and there was the ascension of angel, that you in this room are a testament to, and we're starting to see quite a few pre-profit and pre-revenue exits in the mortgage crisis, and we're starting to see a trend towards faster and earlier exits. So companies exiting earlier and faster than we've seen in previous times. And 10 years ago, the thing that any of us could have imagined, what we're experiencing now. All of the predictions in the book, I think, were predictions as much as they were observations, and all of those have continued. But what anybody could have imagined is the explosion in liquidity that's happened since. That's created the unbelievable, dramatic increase in valuation that we're all living through portfolios, but also in the stocks and bonds in our investment portfolio. And what's happened here, and by the way, can you guys still hear me if I get so I can point to this? What's happened in this graph is that the volume of M&A transactions in the first half of 2018 was $1.5 trillion worldwide. And you can see this graph goes back to 98. There was a peak before in 2007 or so, but we've never had more M&A activity than we're having today. And what's interesting in America, blue line in the US, same thing is happening in Europe, Asia, even Japan, which has had some difficulties over this period, is starting to have an uptick in M&A activity. And this graph shows trillions of dollars, and I have trouble with what a trillion is. It's not a number that I deal with on a regular enough to make sense. So what I'd like to do is describe to you as angel investors what we're seeing in the M&A market is to talk about the transactions that my little firm in 2018. This year, we sold companies, and details for all of these transactions because a couple of them are locked down by NDAs. But what I can do is I can describe them in aggregate. The three companies that we sold in the first half were 2 to 3 years old. None of them had gotten to their third year anniversary. Again, something that I talked about in the book. It was interesting that 2 of the 3 founders were under 80 years old when we started to work with them. Not a terribly big surprise. 2 of them were virtual. This was something that I hadn't imagined 10 years ago, but today of the companies that we've sold were virtual companies. And that's a really interesting new development in the world. Virtual, virtual means that there is no central location where people work online and are scattered all over the world. And so I will admit, the first time about 8 years ago that a virtual company sold, I had a momentary panic. What's going to happen when they show up in Vancouver and they want to visit the company? And in that case, what happened was they showed up in Vancouver. We met at Vermont. We had a very nice lunch. They left. It didn't seem to be a problem. Then everything else proceeded on the phone, and they bought the company. They re-domiciled to California. Nobody in the company noticed because they were going to work anyway. And now what I've come to realize is that it's actually easier to sell a virtual company than one with a physical location. There's no conversation about moving assets across the border, no concerns about leases. There's no issues around new employment agreement or new employment. I think actually virtual companies are more competitive than you show up to work. The 3 companies were virtual, and one of the companies that sold had only 1 employee. And only those companies had, which is also in fact, one of them had in those ranges. And only one of those companies profitable. Not because they're only 2 or 3 years old. The aggregate value revenue, early exit talked about things getting sold before they were generating revenue, but it was still pretty unusual now. Companies are sold all the time and don't have revenue. And in fact, you're seeing buyers like Google, they would prefer to buy the companies before they generate revenue. The total of those three Canadian dollars was 400. So 300 in companies 3 years. And if you look at money, the mean, it's at 14.8 times numbers. A fan of forward numbers. That's 2 years out. We're still paying 31 distributor. This is not a company that take open up and show acquisition did. Microsoft paid 30 times revenue, 30 times, and that's, to me, an angel investor, as a guy that is living these days selling companies, it's crazy. It's absolutely doesn't make economic sense. It is the don't think any that or those additions possible 5 years ago. Nobody would have thought that we could sell 2 companies with no, some of them with 1 employee for $300 million. Nobody would think those big tech companies would pay that to acquire their companies. And what happened is that by one macroscopic, and this affects everything in the entire economy, everything in being driven by this single thing that's happening. Every one of the things are driven primarily by a single difference in our world. And that's why I want to take the next 10, 15 minutes quickly. I want to go through some of what's that we're not just for this, but also for the investments that we're making as we enter new companies. This graph shows the amount of central bank liquidity that's been into the system since 2009. And again, not just here in America, here's the European Central Bank, got the Bank of Japan, People's Bank of China, and the Swiss National Bank. And what you see here is, well, in 2008, you see $7 trillion in administration. When that happened, I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to put 0.7 trillion into the economy, the world survives. Well, that's the 0.7 trillion. Look what they've done since. This is called quantitative easing. And the reason is they don't like what we used to call it, which was printing money. And the graph here, this up here, this is $20 trillion. Again, I don't know what trillion is, but that's a lot of money that's in there that in the economy 10 years ago or 20 years ago. That is exploding the money supply. This graph just shows the US, and as you can see, it was going up steadily till 2008. Then there's this blip up of about 0.7 trillion, and then crazy, to about 4.5 trillion. And the same thing is happening in the EU, Japan, China. There's an explosion in the quantity of money. And one of the fascinating new realities in the world that we're in is that for the first time in something Japan or China, the entire world is now synchronized. This graph shows correlation of the markets in other parts of the world compared to the US. And the correlation is up to like 8% here. So what happens in China kind of happens here 16 hours later. And this is, again, a kind of a new development, first time in history. And the explosion of liquidity has ended up on corporate balance sheets. It's also in private equity funds valuations. This graph shows the amount of cash that S&P companies have on the balance sheet. And you can see back in 2000, assets as cash, because they were using the cash in the business. Today, about 35% of their assets there earning risk sitting there in a balance sheet. Very interesting, I think, for the conversation we're having here. The amount of pride of this itself is kind of a this graphic back to 2003 shows the amount of dry powder, as they call it in the trillion, to about $1.7 trillion. So what this means is that our funds that have about 1.7's job is to go out and buy majority stakes in companies. And when they do that, when they go out and deploy this equity, they also multiply that with debt, usually 5-6 times. So that 1.7 trillion might drive $10 trillion worth of acquisition appetite in the. You know, when I talk about money supply or quantitative easing, I again find that hard to understand. It's kind of a weird thing that we don't relate to in everyday life or business. But what's interesting, I think, is to translate that to the effect of this amount of money, and that is to see it relate to the cost of money or the interest directly or just a result of the quantity of money. And we all, of course, know what's happened to interest rates because lots of us have money we'd like to earn interest on, which has kind of been a tough thing to do over the last few years. You look at all the developed countries, all of them have slashed interest rates since 2008 and pretty much left them there. So you can't see it very well from back where you are, but that's the Bank of England, Bank of Japan, China, European Central Bank, Swiss National Bank, and the US. All of them, again, in a high degree of correlation, have slashed interest rates to the lowest rates in 5,000. So going back 5 years, and not even close. Like, you know, interest stable at 4%. That's what people used to charge if you wanted to take their money and do something with it. People wanted to return. In years. And what's even more interesting shows negative interest rates on government bonds. And it went from 15. This is 2015. This is not going back to what I had before. So, you've ever heard of in 20? Now there's like 7 trillion. Yes, up to almost 8 trillion. So the idea of buying a negative rate has gotten more popular this last month than before. So, you know, I get to do whatever I want to do in my life, and I have to think about these things. But I can't understand is if you go out and buy a bond, let's say you buy a 5-year bond from any of these countries, Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands, you give them $100,000, and they promise to pay you back $95,000. That's what's happening in a large part of the world. More somebody pay you back, like for sure you're not back all the way, you back less, and you got this is so popular it's increasing. I get a really uneasy feeling when I see how much debt there is with a negative interest rate out there, and I get even more likely not to be sleeping when I know that this graph is going up.
So why is that happening, Basil?
It's happening. First of all, nobody. This is like the great mysteries so far in human history. What it's saying is that people have so much cash, and they're so worried about every other kind of investment. Give it to a government and get back less, because everything else they could do with it looks less attractive than that.
Even just leaving.
Yeah. None of these countries have deposit insurance, by the way.
Is it paying anything?
No. You pay them money to hold on to your money.
Is it inflation protected or is there
Nope. These are nominal interest rates.
So that indicates a very high perception of risk out there. And basically, I'm willing to pay you to guarantee that I'm not capital.
to make me feel better about the chances of you. Yeah. So, incredible amount of money has done to assets, which that's what we care about. We're investors. You know, we're here in America, interest rates of almost anywhere in the world other than Russia right now. China higher rates. But this graph for me as an equity investor quite clearly. So again, this goes back to 92, and you see there was a bubble first in the middle of 2000. Calm bubble. I remember that one pretty well. That was the blip. So, and by the way, the red line shows you the asset values compared to the economy. That's kind of a way to normalize it. And so there was the double bubble, which is that little wee bubble there. Then the bubble that we're all still probably feeling. And here's the current bubble, which has a number of names. They call it the central bankers bubble on this graph. But what's scary is how much bigger this one is than the previous divergences from the growth rate in the economy. What we care about as angel investors is primarily equity valuation. You know, maybe some of you are lending a little bit of money, but we're equity. This is the public tech stock valuations going back to 2000. So you can see the dot-com bubble. That was a pretty peak for tech valuation. Where investors felt 99 was pretty crazy. I didn't put that batshit crazy on there. That was on the graph. That was on the graph. We don't have any way to accurately track valuations. There is values, but the public markets are a pretty good proxy. This one shows the NASDAQ market cap, again, normalized to the GDP. What we say, the NASDAQ, for how much the economy has grown. There was this big peak in 1999 before the look where we are now. Another way to look at valuation is to look at how much of a premium the public is paying for a company that's growing faster. And I won't spend too much time on this, but this is a fundamental valuation. Companies that are growing faster are worth more. And right now we're paying twice as much as we have historically for that growth. As this shows, again, go back to that same kind of beginning of 2000. Here's another way to look at the valuations of public companies. This S&P stock price divided by 100. And the reason I think this is a good graph to look at is the relatively simple concept. Unlike earnings, which there's a lot of new ideas about how to count earnings in the public markets. GAAP is not popular anymore. But sales, revenue, that's a pretty stable number. So you can see there was this time back in 1999 when it was pretty crazy. But again, look where we are now. Warren Buffett, who I think we could agree is a pretty good investor, has had a market valuation indicator, is to take the Wilshire 5000 and divide that by GDP. So he's taking medium and large sized public companies, the very broadest market index of all, to see how valuations look compared to history. This graph goes back to 1970. So back as far as 70, there was kind of a, an average there, and this brown line is 100% just for reference. There was a time back just before 2000 when it got pretty crazy. But again, a scarily similar graph. Look where it is now. So this is why Warren Buffett hasn't made an investment for a couple of years, because he can't find anything that he likes the value of.
Is that one market cap weighted as well?
I'm not sure if the Wilshire 5000 market cap
Yeah,
weighted.
because to be fair, there are a pretty tiny little group of companies that
Yep.
have gone off the world in terms of valuations.
Yes. In fact, we're going to show you a graph that highlights exactly that point.
If you looked at an equal weight chart, it would look quite a lot different, I think.
You're probably right. Here's an example of what you were just talking about. Today, last year, 80% of the IPOs had negative earnings. So 80% of the companies that went public last year didn't have profit. And the last time that happened was in kind of 80. And again, I could have found more graphs to illustrate the point, but the point I think is that almost regardless of how you want to measure the valuation, it feels from a valuation and a market, perspective a lot like 1999 today to me. And the thing that is different, though, dramatically different than back then, is the amount of debt in the world. So we had this huge influx of liquidity that's certainly driven up asset valuations, but it has driven down interest rates. And in driving down interest rates, one of the things that's happened is that it has encouraged people, companies, and especially governments to borrow more. And borrow more at rates quite mind-boggling. This graph starts in 1999 and shows over the last 20 years where we started out with about $80 trillion of debt. Now we've got about $240 trillion of debt in the world. And I'm not sure how much it is, but it makes me really nervous to see that the total amount of debt has tripled over a fairly short period. The U.S., so U.S. federal debt compared to U.S. economy GDP. There was this peak in World War II. In World War II, it was the first time, well, Civil War peak here, World War I. Wars are expensive, and in the previous times, governments had to have big campaigns to get citizens to buy war bonds, to buy munitions and armaments. And this was a pretty scary amount of debt at the end of World War II. We worked that down because, of course, through this period, the boomers were all in their most productive phases. We had kids pretty commonly back then, and the debt got worked down. But today, we're at a peak. The end of this purple is where we are today. We're at a peak now where only we had a debt that high. And what's truly terrifying is that the Congressional Budget Office says that the trajectory looks like that blue line there. So the government's economists are saying that we're going to try and push the debt up to that level. And about that is that debt is not at a level Prime Minister had sustainable. And one head of a country saying that about another country's debt. That's not done. But Jerome Powell, before Congress, said the U.S. is not on a sustainable fiscal path. Fiscal path means debt. And this is not some crazy Tea Party guy. This is the guy that's heading up the Federal Reserve, a very conservative equity guy, saying America is not on a sustainable fiscal path. Even more terrifying, Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, all past heads of the Fed have said the same thing, very clearly. And so where we are today, there's really only two outcomes. There's no way that debt can get paid back. There is no math, there is no economic model, there is no credible economist that says, we're going to work that debt down like we did after the Second World War. Cannot happen. Part of the reason it can't happen is the population's not increasing. There aren't enough workers. The boomers paid back that debt, and then they didn't have enough kids. So we've kind of screwed the economy here by not having enough population growth to allow us to work that debt down. So there's really only two possibilities. We're either going to default or we're going to have enough inflation to work that debt down. There's a really good book that has just come out in the last couple of months by Ray Dalio. Is one of the most successful investors of our time. He's right up there with Buffett. He's not as public as he has been, but he wrote a book and he's giving it away. And to read and shared with me a lot of the analysis that made him a billionaire. And he analyzed all of the previous debt cycles. And he has an opinion what's going to happen is inflation rather than deflationary. That's his opinion. But he doesn't know for sure. And it's actually not something that can be predicted because it's going to depend on how the government responds when things do change. The other thing that's interesting is that this is now the longest expansion in history. This graph goes back to 1854. And there's been business cycles there will always probably be cycles. But this is the longest one ever. And because we all know that because of the way the human animal works, the cycles, we've now broken records with how long this cycle has lasted. And the thing that I think really makes this not just a worry but a certainty is the number of times that the Fed has raised the interest rates. And I haven't heard yet whether they raised them.
We did.
Okay, so then they've raised rates now 9 times. So this graph is going to be like right to there, and I'll update it before I present it again. So rates were 0 up here. And where this gets really interesting is, this is a hard graph to see, but you can find this anywhere online. This is what happened every other time the Fed increased rates. And every time so far the Fed has increased rates, something broke. And people, economists, say that, you know, every other time the Fed's increased rates until something breaks. And they just increase rates again. Nobody really knows, but that's a concern, I think. And the thing that we have never seen before is that we're now reversing quantitative easing. So this quantitative easing had never happened before. It was done, this blue is the Fed, purple is the Bank of China. Who'd have thought that the Bank of China would be that important to what happened? Anyway, Bank of Japan, European Central Bank. So every central bank was increasing liquidity, printing money. They're all stopping at about the same time. And the whole world's all correlated now for the first time ever. This has never happened before. And so what this means is that really nobody knows what's going to happen next. Janet Yellen, the previous Fed chair, said while she was the Fed chair, right, and you know how the Fed chair is hard to understand language. What she said was the Fed openly does not have any experience calibrating the pace and composition of asset redemptions and sales to actual and prospective economic conditions. So I've read that like 50 times. What she's saying is we don't know what's going to happen when we suck this cash back out of the system. And all of the Fed chairs, most of the big bank CEOs, and most of the economists agree that nobody knows what's going to happen. It's never. We don't know whatever is going to happen. There is no know. But if you could know, you could have a lot of money. Because if you knew what was going to happen in the markets, you know, we wouldn't be angel investors. We'd just stay home and occasionally log on to our futures accounts, and then we, you know. But it's worth a lot of money to try. So that, which is impossible for you to see, but it doesn't matter, is done by Nomura, one of the big Japanese banks. And Nomura, you know, I'm sure there were a good number of us, tried to make a picture of all of the risks in the markets. And this horizontal axis is 9 months. So, and then they kind of got to, and they said, all of these things should keep investors awake at night over the next 9 months. And there's like more things than anybody can wrap their head around. What Nomura is saying, any one of these things could be the trigger. Which is why it's impossible to know what or when. So the question that we deal with every day as investors is, how long do we have before something changes? How long is it before the wheels might fall off of this thing? And because the world is so interconnected now, the problem isn't just about America. The problem is something bad could happen in Europe or Asia or the Middle East. Any of those places where we don't even have good economic statistics could be the thing that destabilizes the system, is now being subject of conditions that we've never had before in history. And so, because when is a big question in M&A and angel investing and in everything else we've invested in, we kind of have to make a guess. Because if you don't think about it, if you're not acting proactively, it's just going to happen to you. And I still remember the first several times I lost several $1 million in a couple of months. I never really enjoyed that. I'm much more concerned about, well, okay, when? And again, nobody knows. There is nobody in the world who can tell you when things might change. If you ask me, I would guess that we've maybe got 1 or 2 years before something changes. But people who know me say I am a perpetual optimist as well. So to summarize this part of the presentation, central banks have provided an unprecedented amount of monetary stimulus, reducing rates to the lowest ever, printed enormous amounts of money, which has flowed into every part of the economy, increasing valuations way beyond the 1999. But at these valuations and other fundamentals, there's no question this is the hottest M&A market in history. There's no question today is the best time that there's ever been to sell equities, any kind of equities. You can get the best price in history now. That's a certainty. I think this is going to be described as kind of a golden era for entrepreneurs and angels because so much money is being made by these that we're also. I got a whole talk about why history is going to call this a golden era, and there's a video up on my website you can find about. This is a talk that I gave to the business school up in Vancouver about why I think history is going to call this the best time ever. But
So that's the kind of question. I've thought about in the last few months about the possibility of being a downturn, like you're talking about here, without the same amount of detail. But a lot of people are saying that because of what we learned in 2008 in theory, and because of what's left of the Dodd-Frank laws and other things, that whatever happens will be a correction and not a major downturn. Do you think that's true, or?
yeah, I'm an optimist, so I hope that we've gotten smarter. A lot of the past Fed chairs, like Janet Yellen, for example, in the last couple of weeks, has been saying that she's worried that we aren't going to be as able as we were last time because we don't have the political ability to do done in 2008. 2008, the first time Congress didn't pass the TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, and they had to circle those things and do some backroom stuff, and they got enough people to vote, and they passed that bill. But what they also did with Dodd-Frank and some others is they also said, we're never doing that again. That status rate, nobody had improvements in some of the regulations, but there's also been things that make it harder today for politicians to do what they did back in 2007 and 8. So the optimist in me wants to say maybe it won't be as bad, but the head of the Federal Reserves and lots of other people say it's not as good. The other concern that I have is that what if it's not an American problem? Like America seemed to be the flashpoint for 2008. Chinese at 1%. There seems to be some really challenging things happening over there. I have no idea about their ability to respond to a crisis. Europe is hanging on by its fingernails. Europe is in much worse trouble than America was in back in 2008, much worse trouble than America is in today. It doesn't seem to be hanging together politically that well over there. They tried to build regulation around things like having deposit insurance. If you put money into your checking account here, there's a $250,000 government guarantee per person. They don't have that anymore. They tried really hard to put it in place, even like $100,000 like it is in Canada, but they couldn't get people to agree. So I don't know if they're going to be able to put together and do what worked. Even if they did, I'm not sure if it would work again because there's so much debt out there. So in terms of what do we do now, I am certain this is a great time to sell your companies. I'm also certain it's a good time for those companies to raise more capital. But what worries me is if you don't sell today, I think you've got to be very cautious as a company operator or as a portfolio owner, because history, which has been a good indicator so far, we don't know what it could break something in the economy of China. In fact, Trump's trying pretty hard to break something in the economy of China. We don't know where it might happen. But my concern is that because there's never been more debt in the world before, capital might not be as available as it is today for a good number of years. I don't know how many years that might be, but it worries me about some of the companies that have invested. That what if they can't raise money for 5 or 10 years? What if they have to operate through a much tougher environment than we're operating today? You know, in the hottest economy there's ever. What if it gets ugly out there? You know, I don't know. The optimist in me thinks, oh, this is great. It's going to be an awesome buying opportunity. But I'm not to get to that place where it's an awesome buying opportunity.
So Basil, who owns all this debt that makes
People, individuals. If you really, it's a great question. So who owns the debt? So if you look today,
It's sovereign.
that's a good qualification. You could ask the question of whether it's sovereign or not. But if you ask the question either way, the answer is the same. It's people. And sometimes it's people through their pension funds.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's people through insurance companies.
life insurance.
A lot of times people who don't even realize that they have debt. You know, a lot of people today have index funds that their financial planner has put them into. And they've been saying, oh, 40% bonds, 60% equity. They've been saying that forever.
Right.
So a lot of people don't even know that they have exposure to non-American sovereign debt. They don't even know that those, which are called a CLO and a CDO, is a collateralized debt obligation, was those mortgages that they bundled up and sold right in the world that damn near blew up the world's economy. The CLO is exactly the same thing, but it's a corp debt. And it's about the size as the CDOs were. I asked that question because I didn't know what an S&L junk bond was in dollars. Not people are watching that debt market. And everybody who put up their hand when I asked who had money in the markets, everybody had that in their portfolios. All don't hear that stuff, but I bet you 90% of us have that in our portfolio. He's trying to sell right now. Any other questions on that? I want to talk about some of the nuts and bolts more on this.
I look at they have a lot of cash flow assets, and I've heard, at least in Sweden and other back in grass, I think the ability for a lot of these countries to be productive and work themselves out of debt with the population and not so much people coming, not a large family coming up for the future. I just see that the only way is to start considering that are sitting around and how you can, you know, scrape a little off of that every year just to help you with.
Have any trouble sleeping? Listen to what Anybody ever hear some of this by Andrea Ocasio-Cortez? Probably the shining light in the Democratic Party. 29 years old, used to work in a bar like last month. And if you listen, she's saying that very, very clearly and very articulately. She's saying that those damn boomers took all the money. We accumulate the low interest rates and stuff only helped the 1%. So they've got all the money. It's all their fault. We should take money and give. Seriously, I shouldn't joke about this.
They pay 4% on their deposits above a certain amount. They're now considering real estate assets as assets that you have to pay. So they might not have a negative on any savings or a bond, but they got a negative on just what they've acquired through.
You know, again, I shouldn't joke about this stuff, but Illinois is a fascinating glimpse into the future. It's not a state worse off, but in Illinois, because for so many years the unions were very powerful there. There's a lot of, the pensions are funded to, I think, 32%. And the government there has been trying desperately for 10 years to figure out how to balance their budget. And it's so bad in Illinois that they can't pay their suppliers. So if you sell a service to the state of Illinois, your receivables now are out for like a year. And so that's how you know in a company, when you don't pay your suppliers, you know you're on your last breath, because pretty soon they're going to stop supplying. Well, that's what it's like in Illinois. So what they do is the property, exactly like those people you're talking about. And so property tax municipalities in Illinois now are like 10% on the property. What are they doing in Illinois? They're moving up. It's serious. It's like this is not a joke. What's happening is we can track this stuff now because we have much better census numbers. But the real way you can tell is that the U-Hauls, you can't get one in Illinois, but there's a whole bunch of them in most cities in Texas. And no question, the demographic researchers are tracking this, and people are much more mobile than they used to be. It's not just Syrians flooding into Europe. It's like people have a lot more freedom as to where they live. They start taxing that much on their property, they just go somewhere else. So, yeah, it is a real concern, especially if the Democrats get any more traction. That's their solution, is to take the money back from the people that shouldn't have had it. It's those damn 1% boomers. Cheerful talk before Christmas. Anything more on this? Or I want to talk about, so the reason I got to this point in my M&A work is that everybody makes the decision about, okay, you've got some equities in your portfolio, you own a company. When is probably the most important question about selling. And I don't want to stop me when I run out of time here, because I could go on forever on this, but I think I've got a little bit more time. A lot of times when we talk to people who own companies about the exit, you hear that the people that are running the company shouldn't think too much about the exit. This was something that was made very popular by Silicon Valley VCs. In fact, Guy Kawasaki put that in one of his books. Entrepreneurs shouldn't worry about the exit, and instead they should just focus on building the company. He wants any time to violently dis, and his people to my to have in a heartbeat. Another thing that you hear a lot out there is that the exit will present itself at the right time. And this is really terrifying to me, because I used to think this. I used to think if you just wait around, somebody's going to come and knock on the door and offer to buy the company. What's terrifying is it happens quite very often. You'll hear about a company getting acquired because the buyer proactively approached the company and ultimately succeeded in acquiring it. And I hate to see that happen, because I absolutely believe that to get the optimum outcome, you need to have a strategy and a plan. The same way we do with every other part of a company. And for a company like the ones that we invest in, I think they should have an exit strategy that's actually written out and actually signed off by the principal stakeholders. I don't know how the Bellingham Screening Committee does this anymore. I used to know. But one of the angel groups that I really admire is the Tech Angels in Ohio. And John Houston is a guy who I think has really extended some of the ideas that we've been talking about exits for the last decade. And what he has said now is that the company strategy should be part of every board agenda. And what they're doing in Ohio is every time when the board meets, they read the previous minutes, then they reaffirm the exit strategy. They say, okay, our plan is to sell the company in about this amount of time, this amount of dollars. Anybody got any new discussion? If not, can we vote to ratify this again? In every board meeting, they vote on reaffirming the company's exit strategy. And I think this is a really good idea, because I think it continually means actually effective period to refresh that exit strategy amongst the board and the CEO. So what I want to talk about, assuming this is of interest to the audience, is how do you actually do this? Let's say you've got a company you want to sell it, and you don't want the exit to be one of these ones where the buyer knocks on the door. You want to instead optimize the result and get the best terms. I wish I knew this when I sold my company, because even though Jim was quite kind and said that we did a great exit, we did kind of a mediocre exit. And if I knew then what, no, between time, I knew clearly how to design the process to achieve the end result that you want, which is a fair price and good terms. And there's 4 parts to this process, the way that I've kind of put it together here to make it simple. The first part is the work you do before you talk to buyers. Most of the time, I will admit, companies don't do this. This is what I wish happened. But about a quarter of the work of selling a company, first of all, that is get the company's financials and projections in good shape to create the sales collateral, the material that you need to sell the company. A product, I look at it like a product. You need some material to describe it to potential buyers. A lot of times with companies that are more than a couple of years old, but even for some that are 2 years old, you've got to clean up the corporate structure to get it saleable. And I create diligence material before you start talking. This is really hard to do because nobody wants to do this horrible work. The way to do it is to do this in the heat of battle, where there's a buyer trying to get the transaction closed. The last thing you want is this C-level team to be scrambling around trying to build their due diligence. This can take 2 to 5 months. After the time that you've engaged some professionals, you've got resources, it can take 2 to 5 months. I've never seen it done less than about 2 months, because there's just enough work here to do that even a dedicated C-level team with a really good team of professionals, it's going to take some time. If the CEO is busy, it can take longer than 5 months. But that's what that's what should happen, I believe, before you start talking to buyers. Second part, I did not even what a research. The M&A market today is truly global, even for a $20 million company. A company that's worth $20 million will have most likely interest and stays very in China. Chinese a little bit harder today. Japanese are coming in, filling the gap, and doesn't seem to be a problem. Go through this second optimally. You want to start to develop some theories and tactics around the strategic value. You want to ask yourself, who in the world would pay the most to own this company? That's kind of the part of the beginning. And then and you want to test messaging, because this is a campaign. This is like an advertising campaign, but to a pretty limited audience. And initially, for almost any company that's saleable today, you can find between 50 and 250 well-qualified buyers. Bigger bid, because it truly is a global. You start the sales process and you work with 10 to 15 companies that are actively interested in acquiring almost any business. No matter how narrow you think, oh, this one's different, nobody's going to want to buy this. 10 to 50 almost, and probably get into the beginnings of due diligence with 5 to 8. So 5 to 8 companies will start to ask questions that are not in the sales collateral in a typical process. And in an ideal case, you want to work that down to 3 simultaneous bidders. And sometimes I have some interesting debates with people in the industry about whether 3 is manageable. Some people think they can't do more than 1 in a backup. In other words, they're saying 2. I've met people who think you can run 4 people through the auction. It's an interesting debate. I think 3 is the optimum number. But to go through this phase takes 2 to 6 months. And partly because you're trying to talk to and companies that you can eventually have people in the company. It's a complicated, slow process multiplied by that number of people in the sales funnel.
Basil, do you recommend that you do it yourself or you hire a manager?
And let me give you the answer in a minute
Okay.
to why I think the answer is you need some help to do this.
process, both not there for the right time for a company to start that. Because one of the things you mean to me, we tend to use as a general rule, we don't always do this, but we like companies that have revenue, customers that are willing to buy and buy. You say that you're not sure that's necessarily, and you sold some that weren't. I mean, should that be our screening committee filters, and should they want this? Because it's companies.
That's a, the world has changed, and there are successful serial entrepreneurs, some guys that have more gray hair than I do, who have built and sold 6, 7 companies now. It used to be when we were starting, we'd build one company, we'd sell it in a lifetime. That was kind of a life, and maybe you that have done good at it, but really good at it. And there is a school of thought that around the same time you start writing the code. So if the company is owning, you're right.
Validation.
It's true, but the concern is that if you wait till you're all the way there, you've still got another year's worth to do the. So some of these companies are getting sold, lots of them at 2 years. So you're not very far in when, in an ideal case, now that does not happen very often, I will admit. But there are some people who are out there literally starting the exit at the same time they're starting to write the code. Third part, just to quickly run through this, is the most fun part. It's the competitive bidding process. And this is essentially an auction with 3 bidders that can take 2 to 4 months. And to really do this well, you lead to these buyers, and you often have to meet with them, and it can easily take 2 to 4 months. We did one a few years ago. I was talking to somebody about the ADA meeting that was in Boise. And the first exit out of the Frontier Angel Fund out of Boise was a company called Piscinian. They spent more time on the auction. And so we started out, and this is public information, it's on my website, but we started out, and the first offer, we went out looking for $20 million. No revenue, no product either. And we went out to all of the people we thought were going to be good buyers, and they came back with 5 or 6 of them willing to pay $20 million. So the chairman and I went back to the board and we said, we think we can get more money. There was a lot of debate about that and a lot of bad language used that had my name in the same sentence. But we convinced the board that we could go to $25 million. So we went back to the market, which took us about 2 months. So we had to go back. And Johnny, the chairman, went back to all those companies and sat down with them and said, we're really glad you're interested. Really glad you're offering $20 million. Market reception's been better than we thought. It's $25 million. That took a couple of months to do that. We still had 3 bidders, so we went back to the board. I suffered a lot more abuse. We went back to the market and said $30 million. That took another 3 months. Howling and screaming. There was one company left that paid $30 million. That was a company called Synaptic. Very big NASDAQ traded company that was interested in that kind of technology. That was the first big win for the Frontier Angels. But what was interesting is it took us months and months to do that, because these were huge companies. You can't phone people up and say the price has gone up for no reason. You got to go down there and you got to do that kind of thing face to face. So that auction, if done well, can take a couple of months. And then even after you think you have a deal, even after everybody wants to celebrate because you signed a binding letter of intent, that's when the due diligence is actually going to start. That's when the legal process is going to start. And no matter how much you push the lawyers, it's going to take another 2 or 3 months. Especially today, the lawyers are busy. They're already working on the beg, you can plead. There's another 2 or 3 months. And so when you add all that up, to answer the question that Jim asked a minute ago, this takes about 1 to 2 man years of work, excluding the legal and accounting team. So this is 1 to 2 man years for people that have done it before. This is an experienced team's 1 or 2 man years worth of work to do it well, like to sell a company well. And, oops, sorry, I don't know any CEOs and CFOs that have 1 or 2 man years of available time inside of a window which itself is only a year long. So the math to me, and again, I did not do this in my company, several million dollars, but I just don't think it's possible to do the transaction well with the resources that are there. There's been a few, brought into a company to sell it. He only had one job, was just to sell the company. On a calendar basis, yeah, he sold the company that he was brought in to sell. But other than that, that CEO really only has one job. It's not possible, I don't think. Any questions on that, by the way? That's often a big topic, and especially a challenging one for angels. Glenn Butler and I have had this conversation for many years. And one of the things that I think Glenn and Bob and some others here have done is gotten involved as angels to help work. That makes a lot of sense, especially in the current environment where there's not enough professionals to do this work. A couple of months ago, a fellow that runs a software company in Seattle asked me to help him find an M&A advisor. And I said that I would. And we went out and did a selection process. And he was doing it like 35% a year. I knew that was going to be pretty hard for about 100 hard firms in Seattle bid on the job. And to pitch us the transaction. That's how crazy the market for angel transaction. I think the angels do a lot of that work. You have a transaction. That would be a conversation to have about what thing.
Fees have come down dramatically in the last 10 years, at least in large. I don't know the fee.
See, we did a survey. I hadn't seen these with them down. It's a very under advisor as to what their fees were. It's up on the internet.